Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this Thursday, April the 25th. Thanks for joining us tonight. And remember, you can always stay up to date with your local weather information, whether it's forecast or river information, by calling 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, and make sure you head to weather.gov/APRFC. That's the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center for short. You can get to it from our main page here, but when you go to the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center's page, you are going to see the breakup map that is updated that day for you and your community. So make sure you check that out if you haven't. If you can't find what you're looking for, whether it's the breakup map, aviation forecast, tsunami warning information, or anything else, let me know. I'm happy to serve you any way I can. david.snyder@noaa.gov is how you find me online. Now, as it is Thursday, and as we have promised throughout the week, the last several weeks, we have done a river breakup update with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center's Crane Johnson. So let's send it over to Crane with this week's update. Crane?
Hello, this is Crane Johnson, hydrologist with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, bringing you an update to the 2019 spring breakup outlook for Alaska. We'll take a quick look at snowpack conditions throughout the state and the Yukon Territory. We can see that in Alaska, the real highlights are a near record snowpack through the Koyukuk River Valley. And then where areas we don't have much data on the North Slope and Northwest, we also expect above average snowpack conditions in those areas, including the Seward Peninsula. If we look upstream into the Yukon watershed, we can see that generally the Yukon watershed is below average to well below average snowpack throughout the entire watershed and the Canadian portion. If we look at ice conditions, this map shows accumulated freezing degree days throughout the state. And generally it's a warm map, which means that most areas had fewer than normal freezing degree days, which usually indicates generally thinner than normal ice. One example would be Bethel with just 54% of the freezing degree days throughout the winter. And this matches well with ice thicknesses measured in early April throughout the state. Very thin ice down in Southwest, trending towards just below average ice thicknesses throughout the center part of the state. Generally, rivers were thinner or well below average, and lakes were closer to the average thickness throughout the center part of the state. One thing we wanted to remind everybody again was think ice safety when you head out. Things you typically did late April probably aren't possible this year with thin ice conditions throughout the state. Recently we had colder temperatures move through most of Alaska, as well as snowfall that moved through central and eastern Alaska. Here's Monday, snowfall conditions through the center and eastern portion of the state, and then Tuesday that continued. And the cooler temperatures combined with the recent snowfalls basically put a pause in the breakup process from late last week through the middle of the middle of this week. And we expect that to change towards the end of this week with warmer temperatures on the way. If we look at temperature trends expected through the next 5 days, April 24th through April 29th, we expect the return to above average temperatures along the west coast of Alaska, and this would include the lower Kuskokwim River as well as the lower Yukon River. And then if we look to the east, we expect to have, in general, below average temperatures through the central and eastern part of the state. And generally, this is a good condition for breakup. We see warmer than normal temperatures along the lower reaches of the river, where the ice has a chance to decay before the warm temperatures reach the upper watershed and start the snowmelt runoff process. If we look into the future, the 6 to 10 day temperature trends ending May 4th, we see that this signal of warmer temperatures on the west coast is expected to continue and possibly grow towards the east. And then the far east, upper Yukon watershed, we can expect likely cooler than normal temperatures to continue. If we look back at our spring flood potential created on April 10th, this is still valid considering current conditions. And that is generally a lower than normal flood threat for the southern portions of the state, including the Kuskokwim River and the Yukon River, and then trending towards a more normal or average flood threat for the Koyukuk River Basin, where we have a near record snowpack, and for the rivers in the north and northwest, including the Sag and the Kobuk. We also note that rivers in the north and the northwest are expecting a higher than normal volume of snowmelt, and that would include the Seward Peninsula, where they have a deeper than normal snowpack for this year. If we look at one recent notable breakup, Dawson City broke up on April 23rd. The tripod went out, and that ties the record for the earliest breakup on date on record in Dawson City. And the picture shows just a typical image for a thermal breakup where we've got a sheet ice has moved out along the lower reaches. We've got an open tributary that's caused an open area where it meets the Yukon River, and then off to the right, we've got a continued open areas along the Yukon River. If we look at breakup dates, the dates that are printed in black show the average breakup date, and then we've got the areas that have already broken up highlighted in red. And we can see that Dawson City broke up on the 23rd. The Tanana River at Nenana broke up on the 14th, which was a record early date. The Koyukuk, or the Kuskokwim River, broke up at Nikolai on March 31st, record early. And the Kuskokwim River at Bethel broke up on April 14th, which was record early. As well as other rivers broke up in South Central. Generally, through the southern portions of the state, including the lower Yukon and upper Yukon, we expect breakup to be on the order of 1 to 3 weeks early. And then for the northern half of the state, we expect breakup to be either on average or slightly early, up to 10 days early for those areas. If we look at our current breakup map, we can see that the breakup continues on the Kuskokwim River with some open areas reported along the middle stretches of the Kuskokwim. McGrath still has ice in place, but we know it's weak ice. South Central, the Yentna and the Skwentna rivers have both broken up in the last week. The Susitna River is either some open or mostly open throughout its entire length. The Copper River is either some open or mostly open throughout its entire length. And then the Tanana River is again some open or mostly open throughout its entire length. The Yukon River is still ice covered all the way up through the border, and we know that it broke up recently in Dawson City. There's some open areas upstream of Dawson, and then as we head towards Whitehorse, we see some mostly open areas on the Yukon River. And then rivers to the north, both the Koyukuk, the Kobuk, and the Sag, other northern rivers are still ice covered. If you live out on these rivers, one thing you can expect in the next week or so is our Riverwatch teams to be both on the Kuskokwim and the Yukon rivers, and they'll be providing direct air-to-ground updates on ice conditions in your local area. For more information, please check our website at www.weather.gov/APRFC.
Thanks, Crane. Fire danger is growing just a little bit now in our recent days of dry weather. Expect that to continue as we go into the weekend. There right now just some patchy areas of low-end, higher fire danger across the western Kenai, Copper River Valley, and the northern parts of the Susitna Valley. This is updated as of today. As we look at the satellite picture across the region, you can see low pressure across the central and northern Gulf. Cloud cover working its way eastward with a weak front that's already falling apart, but gale force winds there across the Gulf. You can see all the dry weather across the interior, southwest, and into the Bering Sea. Building areas of high pressure across the Bering and into the interior will keep the sun shining for many locations as conditions continue to dry out as we go through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Here's low pressure right now sitting across the Gulf. This low, again, not a terribly strong one, pushing a front up against the northern and eastern Gulf Coast. A cold front dragging southward is bringing some modestly cooler air with it, but the main effects right now are clouds and some areas of showers and not a whole lot of snow across the northern parts of southeast at this point. As we get into tonight, you'll see that front working ashore and already falling apart as we go. With that 1,008 millibar low, expect the winds to come up just a little bit more in southeast, but the backside of that is pretty ragged and already falling apart across south central, southwest as high pressure builds into the Yukon Delta at 1,032 millibars. Watch for areas of maybe some spotty snow showers across the Deltana region as well as the eastern Alaska range, but most areas are probably not going to see that. And high pressure is also setting up across the northern parts of the Yukon, and watch for some spotty snow showers across the western Brooks Range. To the west, though, a more notable weather feature, that low pressure system across eastern Asia and the Kamchatka Peninsula at 980 millibars is going to start this southerly draw across the western chain. And as you'll see when we talk about sea ice in a little bit, there is some new multi-year ice. There is some there's some multi-year ice here north of St. Lawrence Island and in the Bering Strait. And because of that, that southerly wind is going to start pushing some of that north. But again, make sure you watch the marine segment coming up here in just a minute. As that front works its way eastward, it is going to push that center of high pressure across most of interior Alaska, ranging from about 1,030 millibars or so all the way out into the southwestern Bering Sea from the northern Yukon territory. That's going to keep most of our weather fairly nice through Friday and into Saturday. It's also pushing away low pressure and weakening it substantially as it moves through the central and southern parts of the Panhandle. And by the time we get to Saturday and Sunday look really nice for southeast and certainly considerably warmer for the central and eastern interior, maybe 50s and 60s for a large number of folks. Frontal boundary and storm just to the south of the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula will continue working its way north and east just a little bit. You'll get more of the clouds from that southeasterly flow than anything else. That main system doesn't really get its way any further north than this. And another wave of stronger southerly winds will reinforce the warming taking shape across the northern Bering Sea and the Chukchi as we get into Saturday and Sunday with fair weather just about everywhere else. Let's take a look at temperatures quickly. Overnight, you're looking at 30s in southeast, 20s to about 30 degrees for south central, southwest, teens and 20s for you. The interior, Fairbanks, about 25, 6 in Arctic Village, single digits and warming up for the North Slope overnight, 21 in Nome and 21 for Gamble and Savunga, 27 for St. Paul and St. George, 40s and 50s for south central and southwest, still in the 30s and below freezing for Norton Sound and Nome, 33 in Kotzebue, 21 for Utqiagvik, 19 in Kaktovik, mid to upper 40s for the interior, southeast 40s and 50s. Overnight lows Saturday morning, much milder for southeast, south central closing in on freezing, southwest in the 20s, Unalakleet 22, Galena looking at 23, Fairbanks mid-20s there, and teens and low single digits there for most of the North Slope. Kotzebue again 26, high temperatures on Saturday, easily into the 50s for the interior and south central.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. MVFR should be fairly widespread across the North Slope, but you will see a dramatic improvement as you move east from Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse toward Kaktovik. South of the Brooks Range, conditions start to improve along the Yukon Valley. VFR is expected along the length of the river, really, until you get up to the Yukon coastline. St. Paul and St. George also looking at marginal conditions in the morning, and you'll see a swath of IFR way out west around Shemya as the next wave of southerly wind starts to build in. Out across central and southern parts of southeast, look for IFR conditions there. Marginal weather across the eastern Gulf, and you'll see that turn into generally marginal conditions south of the capital city, out over Cross Sound, but north of that toward Haines and Skagway and most of the Lynn Canal should be VFR flying as you get through Friday afternoon. Conditions for VFR really widespread across the interior, southwest, south central, Prince William Sound. The North Slope will have a little more trouble there, generally west of Ambler and out toward the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, all the way through Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, and really Kaktovik and Barter Island as well. You can see that swath of IFR shifts eastward just a little bit, but really doesn't take over most of the Bering Sea for Friday afternoon. It doesn't make a whole lot of progress for Saturday morning either. For southeast, generally looking at VFR conditions, most of the Gulf, all VFR as you get into south and west and the interior. The upper Tanana Valley still looking at some marginal conditions there, and areas around the Beaufort Seacoast and through Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, and then into the upper Koyukuk Valley. IFR starts to push in towards Sand Point and the Pacific coast of many areas around the Alaska Peninsula. Cold Bay, False Pass, all looking at IFR at least by Saturday morning. That will shift a little bit further north and east toward AKwx, approaching Chignik as we get closer to areas around Saturday afternoon. Sand Point and west, all looking at least some chance of IFR. Southeast still looking pretty good for VFR for Saturday afternoon, all the way through South Central, the West Coast, the North Slope. IFR conditions hovering very close to Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, Eagle down toward Northway, and then our swath of southerly winds, warmer weather, and moisture is sneaking eastward, now approaching Kiska and sneaking closer and closer to the western end of St. Lawrence Island by Saturday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions for Saturday. MVFR expected for Anaktuvik Pass and for Adigan Pass as we go through your Friday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expected to be visual flight rule really all day long tomorrow. Rainy Pass may start out at marginal levels going toward VFR by the afternoon, and also looking to see some general improvements for Windy Pass and Isabel Pass as we go through Friday. Mentasta Pass at this point looking to be a marginal start to VFR as we go through your day. Tanita Pass looks to be VFR through most of the end of the week, and Portage Pass continues in that similar fashion. Chilkoot and White Pass looking at marginal levels there. Some improvement noted through the day, and then Saturday looks pretty good as we saw. And as we look at freezing levels, you'll notice there is some warmer air just kind of hovering right over south central and southwest. A ridge of high pressure is really taking over a large part of Alaska. It's not horribly strong, but strong enough to really change up the scope of the weather picture through the weekend. Looks like a great weekend for flying. Out across the central and western sections of the chain, remember we were talking about that southerly wind developing. Well, that's the warmth building in there, and you can see levels coming up across the western chain from 2 to about 4,000 feet, and warmer areas even further south. Icing potential across southeast is holding around 6,000 to 7,000 feet and above. Isolated moderate conditions there should prevail through most of the weekend. There's a little batch of moisture across the north slope. That's running around 5,000 feet and above, though, to run into that icing potential. And there's more lurking just to the south of the Alaska Peninsula, but that's way up there, around 10,000 feet and higher for isolated moderate potential. Here's the jet stream now, and this is the factor that controls the movement of all of the weather at the surface. Above, at around 30,000 feet or so, you can see wind speeds at around 100 to 115 knots, driving into a ridge of high pressure here across the Bering. And then we get into a northerly flow coming down the west coast. This is very dry and generally stable area at this point. And with that, you can see the warmer weather building in with a ridge out over the central and eastern Pacific. The ridge out in the west is really going to take over most of the weather pattern for Alaska in the coming days. So you can see at 9,000 feet that process begins with a high over Norton Sound, north and westerlies across the eastern interior, gentle onshore flow across most of southeast but still unsettled, and west and southwest winds across the western Bering 25 to 50. That's where the heat's coming from. At 3,000 feet, the ridge is building in across western Alaska, northerlies coming down the Alcan border, onshore flow and unsettled for southeast, winds around 20 to 35, and westerlies building in across most of the western Bering Sea. So what about turbulence? It's really going to be pretty spotty right now. Most of the interior should not have any significant issues. Below 4,000 feet, though, south of Port Alexander and outside of Sitka, look for a little bit of chop down toward Haida Gwaii. Out over the Alaska Peninsula, a little bit better chance for some bumps.
The Super Spring Triangle.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight. It's the middle of spring and 3 bright stars are taking center stage.
It's called the Spring Triangle and it's huge. Covering 1/6 of the sky, the Spring Triangle incorporates 3 ancient constellations. There's a lion, a herdsman, and a maiden up there.
Now, I'll be honest, it's really tough to see a lion, a herdsman, and a maiden in those stars. But even though I don't have the required imagination,
I don't know if anyone does.
the 3 main stars are easy to find.
And at least you'll know where these constellations live.
What are we talking about? Let's show you. Okay, we're facing southeast at 10 p.m. any night this week. We have the super wide-angle view on since the Spring Triangle is huge.
If you live in a city, the 3 stars in the Spring Triangle might be all you can see. And there they are, 1, 2, and 3.
We'll start with the star on the far right. That's Regulus, the brightest star in the constellation of Leo the Lion. You usually start seeing Regulus early in the spring, and it shines with a blue-white light.
The star farthest to the left, and the brightest of the trio, is Arcturus. Arcturus is the brightest star in the herdsman named Boötes. If you look carefully, you'll notice that Arcturus is quite orange, a very different color than Regulus.
And the 3rd star in the Spring Triangle is Spica, the brightest star in Virgo the Maiden. Spica is the dimmest of the 3 and the bluest too.
Let's compare the 3 stars in the Spring Triangle to our Sun. The Sun is about 865,000 miles in diameter and lies about 93 million miles away. That's the distance light travels in 8 minutes. So we'd say the Sun is 8 light minutes away.
The Sun is dinky compared to the 3 Spring Triangle stars. Regulus, for example, is 3 times the diameter of the Sun, shines 288 times brighter, and is 79 light years away. So instead of 93 million miles, Regulus is more than 460 trillion miles away.
Yikes. Well, Spica is even bigger. It's 7.5 times the diameter of our Sun, shines 2,200 times brighter, and lies 250 light years away. That's equal to about 1.5 quadrillion miles.
And that leaves Arcturus. It is by far the largest of these stars at 25 times the Sun's diameter. Since it's an orange star, it's not as hot as the others. So while it still shines 170 times brighter than our sun, it doesn't give off nearly as much energy as the hotter Regulus and Spica.
Arcturus is the closest of the three spring triangle stars at around 37 light years, but that's still like 217 trillion miles.
But who's counting? We're zoomed in on Regulus and its constellation Leo. When I connect the dots on the main stars, I guess I can see a lion sitting with his front paws stretched out. Well, it's certainly easier to imagine than a herdsman or a maiden, just you wait and see. The lion has a backward question mark for a head above Regulus and a triangle for a tail. And this is supposed to be the Nemean lion that was killed by Hercules. Whew, that must have been some battle.
Now we're looking at the star Arcturus and its constellation of Boötes. Yep, Dean's right, I can't see a herdsman in these stars at all. Instead, I look for stars that make a kite shape or an ice cream cone. Then, down and to the right of Boötes, you can find Spica and the stars of Virgo the Maiden. She is often depicted as a goddess lying on her side holding a piece of wheat, the star Spica. If you can see a herdsman and a maiden in these stars, congratulations, you have an ancient Greek imagination.
So there you have it, the spring triangle, Regulus, Arcturus, and Spica.
And although you may have trouble seeing Leo, Boötes, or Virgo, you can appreciate these three celestial beacons for what they are.
Fascinating and far-flung stars.
Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
All right, back with your marine forecast now. Some big news today. The Alaska Sea Ice Program spotted some multi-year ice that made its way through the Bering Strait. It's north of St. Lawrence Island, west of Nome, and east of Russia. But this general area here is looking at ice that is survived at least one melt season past this last summer and is now into the new year. And so it's been a while since we've seen that there with the satellite imagery, but we could really use your community reports from Gamble, Savunga, Wales, and the Bering Strait communities there. If you see multi-year ice, please let the Alaska Sea Ice Program know, or those that report to the National Weather Service from your community. It would really help us do our job better, and again, help keep you out of danger there, as we can give you a better idea of where some of that thicker and older ice is. So be careful out there, but again, if you got pictures, we'd love to see it. Good news there. Let's take a look at the marine forecast. South and east wind will be generally light across the inside passage, 15 to 25 knots, a little bit stronger up in the north, of course, 25 knots and 5-foot seas there. An onshore flow south of Sitka into the Clarence Strait region and Dixon entrance, 9 to 10-foot seas on the outside. Smaller seas as you head northward toward Gustavus, Yakutat, and into Prince William Sound. As we get into Saturday, weather gets even better. We'll have a little bit more of a northwesterly flow across the outer coast at 20 knots, on the inside down to 10 knots, and diminishing seas there as well. 2-foot seas there in the south, 4-foot seas in the Lynn Canal, northerlies there at 20 knots, and westerlies coming across the northern Gulf for Saturday. Across south central Prince William Sound, looking at northerly winds 15 to 20, 3-foot seas on the inside, 7-foot seas on the outside, and north and westerly winds gentle in the northern parts of Cook Inlet, a little bit stronger off the Kenai Fjords and out of Resurrection Bay, 20 knots over the Barrens, with a 5 to 6-foot sea there on Saturday. By Sunday, light winds all the way around, small seas all the way around, 2 to 4-foot seas tops. Looks like a great day to be out on the water there across Prince William Sound with that northwesterly wind, 10 knots and 2-foot seas there on Saturday. In Bristol Bay, similar conditions, northeasterlies there under high pressure, 2-foot seas up to 3-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast. Look for a north and easterly wind inside of Shelikof Strait, 15 to 30 though, with winds and seas picking up as you head west of False Pass and Sandpoint. 9-foot seas there on that 30-knot wind coming in hard from the east. For Saturday, winds diminish in that region, but you'll notice they spread out a little bit up the Pacific coast toward Kodiak Island, 15 to 25 knots. You're looking at 9 to 12-foot seas in the Pacific coast, and easterlies are picking up 20 to 25 with 3 to 6-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast for your Saturday. For Friday in the chain, look for 15 to 35 knots there across most of the region. Now the Pacific coast will see stronger winds closer to an area of low pressure that's moving northward out of the Pacific. Expect about 13 to 14 foot seas there, 6 to 7 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast. And then we get back into that southerly draw that's building on the first wave of a stronger area of low pressure out across the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's sending that warm and wet air into the Bering. You can see it builds in again on Saturday. Another wave will be working through, and that's going to have effects on the new sea ice up north. More on that in a minute. 15 to 20 knot winds across the central and eastern chain, 25 knots south of Unalaska Dutch Harbor with 11 to 13 foot seas there, and 13 to 16 foot seas building out across the west for Saturday. The west coast, light winds under high pressure, 10 to 20 knots. A stronger southerly flow a little bit further out to sea around St. Lawrence Island, St. Paul and St. George and St. Matthews, starting to get in on that leading edge of faster winds. Light winds around Norton Sound, 5 knots there, 2 foot seas inside the Kuskokwim Delta. Winds start to pick up a little bit more on Saturday with that east and southeasterly flow, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots. Expect 6 foot seas around St. Paul and St. George, 13 foot seas around St. Matthew on a 30 knot wind, and that offshore wind is starting to build a little bit around Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Now, as we look up north, you'll see that southerly wind. That means that multi-year ice we were just talking about, that's going to start drifting northward through the strait again. So keep your eyes on that. Southerly winds on the Chukchi coast, 15 to 20 knots, and light winds for the Beaufort, 5 to 10 knots there. And building in a little bit more on Saturday, a southerly flow, 10 to 20 knots there, and strengthening even more off of Point Hope and Cape Lisburn, 25 to 30 knot winds for your Saturday. Recapping tonight's weather, no watches, warnings, or advisories for any part of Alaska unless you want to talk about more sunshine and more heat. Should be a fairly nice weekend for most locations there. Low pressure still sitting across the central and eastern Gulf is starting to fall apart, so it's not done with southeast just yet, but by tomorrow night especially, and into Saturday, conditions should greatly improve. Watch for showers across parts of southeast tomorrow. High pressure really chips away at the clouds for most of the mainland, with levels there around 1,030 millibars. There is a building area of low pressure just south of the Alaska Peninsula, and that's going to bring in some rainfall to areas south of AKwx, all the way out toward Falls Pass and Cold Bay. Another wave of low pressure across the western Bering will keep things warming up across the northern parts of the Bering and the Bering Strait as we get into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. For many locations there where you are, though, conditions should improve.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.